Hey y'all, and welcome back to the pod. This is our 13th episode, and I'm going to share something with you that I never thought I'd share on this podcast, but I'm a huge, huge fan of the Friday the 13th series of films. And I just said that out loud to everyone listening. I recognize how problematic they are. I recognize how silly they are. I recognize how poorly made they are. And yet, I guess the heart wants what it wants. They are somehow comforting to me. I enjoy watching them. They remind me of somehow my childhood. And there's just something about this notion of being in a camp and being on a lake that is cool to me, even as it comes with a maniac killer who just slices and dices at will. But one of the things that works in Friday the 13th is this notion of terror at the edge of the forest. And this notion that has been with us for quite a long time, that as we sit around the campfire, there's always something outside waiting to get us that is probably in some ways primordial for us, but certainly lends itself even into our first literatures in the Western world, in Greek and Roman texts, where we have this notion of the forest outside holding danger that translates deeply into the Gothic and translates into everything today as well. This we kind of call liminality, right? The boundary between the forest and us sets up this limin or doorway between the two that we worry about being transgressible, that we worry what's going to come through that doorway from that other world into us. And that's going to be something that we talk about in today's episode. And I'm excited to get into that with you. So catch us after the break, folks. Welcome to Toddling the Stacks, a human-produced children's literature podcast for adults. I'm your host, Sean, an award-winning educator with a PhD from Princeton English. In my professional life, I think a lot about the Victorian, the environmental humanities, and the history of the book. But in my personal life, I'm the father of a toddler, and she reads hundreds of books a year. She's taught me that everyone should be reading picture books, and this podcast will show you why. So, against all odds with that intro, today's episode is going to be about Goodnight Moon, 1947's super famous text by Margaret Wise Brown and illustrated by Clement Hurd. This is getting ready to celebrate its 80th birthday real soon, and it has become one of the largest texts out there. This is one that you're guaranteed to get at a baby shower or for baby's first birthday, one of those sorts of things. It is, to quote the back of the book, everyone's favorite bedtime book. I want to introduce Brown, but I'm going to save that for a later episode because there's just so much fruitful stuff there that we can talk about that we don't have time to talk about today. We wouldn't be able to give it justice while talking about the things I want to talk about. So we'll save that for another day. Similarly, this is a book that I don't really think needs introducing. In as much as I don't want to introduce Brown, I don't feel the need, especially to introduce this book. And yet, I'll give us a brief rundown, right? This is just the story of a young rabbit who is trying to fend off sleep, as children do, and saying goodnight to all of the random things in his room. And there's something in this book that is comforting for children because it helps them to identify for the first time sort of the things around them in the world. And that is the same sort of thing that we do if we do a grounding exercise from therapy, right? That we reach out and touch and recognize the reality of our existence. And that's what's happening here. We see that there is a picture of three bears sitting in chairs, and that grounds us into the real world against the kind of eeriness of sleep. For children, this works very well, but there is something for me, and I think that this is not unusual. There's something for me that's deeply creepy about this book. It starts off with the little house that exists in the room of Goodnight Moon. There's a little dollhouse there that glows eerily. And against the space of the gigantic room that we're in, there's a kind of uncanny valley operating. The size of the room itself is strange. It's called the Great Green Room from the very beginning, and there's something about that almost evokes The Shining. This is a strangely large room for a child, and it has its own fireplace. It has its own telephone. Not really sure what's going on with all of this. Creepy. Why is there a balloon in the Great Green Room? Why is it a red balloon? Of course, we have Stephen King's It on top of this, on top of The Shining to layer onto that. And then some of the things that we say goodnight to. Goodnight nobody is one of the most truly frightening lines I think that I've read in literature. Just a recognition of goodnight to the nihil outside there. And then goodnight air. Well, how can we continue after that? We even have, after goodnight air, we have goodnight noises everywhere. Because, of course, in space, no one can hear you scream. We have a quiet old woman whispering hush. As we talked about last week with the articles, why is this an indefinite article? Why don't we know who this woman is that's whispering hush? Why is it an anonymized, quiet old woman whispering hush? And then another thing, not for nothing, is the presence of the cats among rabbits and mice. And the cats are presented as pets. They're just waiting for the quiet old lady to go to bed so that they can steal her chair. But these, of course, in the domestic sphere are the apex predators, right? They would easily eat rabbits. They will easily eat mice. And yet here they are in this bedroom where they will sit in the chair watching over the baby bunny as he sleeps. Creepy. All of this for me leads into a question of the uncanny. And today we define the uncanny as this sort of eerie feeling, strange and detached feeling of eeriness. And it's a concept that we've, as a species, as a people, have dealt with for a long time and tried to understand why sometimes we look at things and we feel a certain kind of way about them. There's a lot of thought about this out in the world, really serious thought. Freud has an entire essay on this that inspires Lacan, inspires Kristeva. And there's just a whole tradition of trying to understand where this feeling comes from. And I'm going to play kind of on some of those in a sort of structuralist / post-structuralist way, just thinking about that original concept that we started with liminality and transgression. Because to start off with Freud, what I see happening in this book is what Freud defines as the heimlich and the unheimlich, or the homely in English and the uncanny in English. But unheimlich, of course, simply means unhomely. And heimlich, while it does mean homely and cozy, today carries more of a feeling of covertness or secretness. And unheimlich, while it does mean unhomely, means uncanny, so that eeriness, rather. It sets up this sort of model where there is that which is of the home and familiar and kept within us, and that which is outside of the home and unfamiliar to us. For me, what actually happens is that the uncanny doesn't actually become situated in the unheimlich. It becomes situated in that limin between the two. If we see the homely as the black and the unhomely as the white, it's the gray area that exists in the middle is where the uncanny is. It's that limin. It's the thing that transgresses, where you have elements that are at once part of the home and yet not part of the home. They are strange, they're eerie. We recognize them, but there is something different about them. We recognize them, but they don't make us comfortable. We recognize them, but in this light, they are strange. I think that is consistently what is happening in this text over and over and over again. We are presented with things which are of the home. And for children, they don't have the ability to recognize this uncanniness quite as much. But for us, we have a much better and more keenly defined sense of what is homely. And so we recognize these elements that are strange, that are different, and yet nevertheless not so completely out of place that they feel wrong. It takes an intellectual process to sort of identify why we feel this strangeness. So for instance, the need to say goodnight to nobody is strange to us because we recognize that in the negative space of just the ether between us and the next nearest object, there is nothing. And the idea that there could be something there that we don't recognize becomes truly terrifying. Because we have at once the ether, the negative space of our home, which we recognize and deal with and live in every day, and suggest that there is something there which coincides with this homely space, about which we have no recognition and about which we have no knowledge. And so that unhomely moment, the thing which is outside, the nobody, and then the homely moment of the ether, of the negative space, combines the confrontation there. That gray area in the middle is where the eeriness and the uncanny resides in that limin. And the need to say goodnight to the air suggests the possibility that the air will at some point no longer exist. And this is something that denies the continuation of the homely and then, of course, becomes unhomely. One way that we actually see this play between the heimlich and the unheimlich happening, the homely and the unhomely happening in this text, is simply that Clement Hurd, the illustrator, plays quite a lot with light here. We have a light that is illuminating the room in the beginning and slowly becomes dimmed as the rabbit is succumbing to sleep. The baby rabbit is succumbing to sleep. And he does a really masterful job, I think, of showing how that light is at work. And it is colored, but it suggests that sort of grayness. It suggests that sort of duality between the world as it exists at night and the world as it existed in the day. And this, I think, is really at the heart, too, of that sort of liminality, that sort of space between what is homely and what is unhomely, is that at night, things become quite different. they become seen in a very different way. And we become much more susceptible to recognizing that boundary between the two because of those initial fireside connotations. We begin to understand them. Herd's playing with the light, his ability to create muted shades that still show light and yet showing encroaching darkness. It's just really wonderful and adds so much to this text. It's just the whole thing works really well, even as it is indeed somewhat creepy. And so all of these just become this sort of gray area that leads to the creepiness of this text and makes it, frankly, for me, truly hard to read to my child. And Addie, I think, is not there at all. She does love Goodnight Moon, but strangely, she loves My World, which is marketed as a companion book to Goodnight Moon, quite a lot more. We read that one considerably more often, and that deals with the distinction between the things that are the little rabbits and the things that are his parents or his mothers or his fathers, and his beginning and fledgling recognition that the things that he has are toys and minuscule versions of the actual homely objects that his parents possess. He is his mother and father's boy. His boy is a baby bear. His car is a toy car that cannot go as far as his father's. And it's a more mature and developed understanding of the world than the initial recognition suggested in Goodnight Moon provides. So she actually likes that text quite a lot more, even though it ends in a sort of fantastical and fading out way. The how many stripes on a bumblebee just really gets to her every time, and I love that. And so a somewhat shorter episode this week for a great text that really doesn't need as much exposition as some of our other ones have, less familiar text. But go out, read Goodnight Moon if you haven't already. I don't know if that's possible, but if you haven't read it yet, it is time to go get it. One thing that I might suggest is that you go with the larger format books rather than the board book format, just because this is one that you'll be reading for quite a long time, and board books tend to dissolve at the spine, as I'm sure we all know by now. And you'll just thank yourself later when you don't have to repurchase this text. Neither here nor there. As always, thanks for listening. Stay safe, get your kids to the library, and keep on reading together, folks. Bye now.
This has been Toddling the Stacks. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your podcatcher of choice for new episodes every Monday, and follow us on Insta, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. Keep up with Adeline's reading now, find links to buy your favorites, and more at toddlingthestacks.com. Address questions or concerns to pod, that's P-O-D, at toddlingthestacks.com. Graphics for today's show were created by Emily Tatro. Make a website so people can hire you, Emily. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.